In this episode, we are going to be reviewing the 1961 classic Italian film La Notte, which was directed by Michelangelo Antonioni. It starred Jeanne Moreau, Marcello Mastroianni, and Monica Vitti. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast where we explore movies from all over the world and talk about how those stories were told on film, as well as interviews with various industry professionals who work in film, television, and theater. I want to welcome back to the show Joe Crisafulli, who is a producer, writer, director, editor, actor, and is the chief entertainment critic at Notte. Joe, welcome back. Thanks so much again for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me, Robert. Thrilled to be here.
It's we've done a lot of films, you and I, and we haven't hit up on Antonioni yet. So I'm excited about talking about La Notte because my relationship with Antonioni has evolved and changed over the years. And I was curious, how did you take to his films when you first started seeing them?
Yeah, I know what you mean. He can be a slow burn in terms of access to what he's trying to do, because he does sort of abandon typical narrative for a visual narrative, or speaking with images and movement and space, and challenging the notion not just of time but screen time, the notion of screen time too. So when I first when I was, I guess, I saw L'Avventura like when I was fresh out of college at an art house here, and I was prepared, like I knew about his long takes walking down a hallway, or long pan that you assume is going to amount to like a payoff. So I was prepared for that. The first time I saw his movie, maybe I was glad I had a cup of coffee in my hand. But it was pretty short order after that I just realized what I appreciated, what he was doing so much. And whether it's that, or at the time a movie like Run Lola Run from Germany, which was all kinetic energy, I'm fine with being challenged and surrendering to the authorial control of a movie's pace. So it was something that I had to basically mature a little bit to fully appreciate. I'm glad I did.
Yeah, no, I had a similar experience because I remember about 10 years ago, I just took mainly this trilogy, the Alienation trilogy. So you got La Notte, L'Avventura, and L'Eclisse, and L'Eclisse, sorry. And I at first it was like I could appreciate it, but I just could not invest in it because of everything you just said. I mean, the characters were so cold. They kept everything in, and I wasn't used to the storytelling of the connection between people and environment and architecture, which now I'm fascinated by. But I think 10 years ago, I just had a hard time. And then, as you said, it's a slow burn. So second viewing liked it more, third viewing, just absolutely loved it. So this actually, after seeing it again a couple of days ago, this was actually only the second time I've seen La Notte. And even though I had a hard time with his films at first, they always stayed with me. I always wanted to see them again. I was always attracted to them. So I was curious, after seeing it again, did you have a different experience that you remember prior to seeing it, or how do you feel about it in general?
Well, this was the first time that I've seen any of his movies on a small screen. So I think that also is very key. If you're seeing it out of the theater, it's more challenging. Seeing it now, I really, this has always been one of my favorite movies. So
in general, or by him?
In general. That being said, I have about 60 favorite movies. So I actually have a list. I basically, it's like music. I thought, let me do a list. And like music, if it's something that's playing, I will always make the effort. So like if there's a good song you like, whatever it is, whatever you're doing, you're going to turn up the volume. That was my criteria for the list.
Right.
So what I'm saying is, it's not really something that I had to be reawakened to. I guess some of the shots, for some reason, I feel like I just had even more, because when the first few times I saw the movie, I was so absorbed in the two main characters, because I've always found, even as, you know, a single person, young person, I always found the nature of marriage and the exploration of marriage through cinema to be really fascinating. And so I was just so absorbed the first couple times I saw the movie, first of all, in the main two characters, in her walking through life within the movie, trying to figure things out, and him sort of just uh, abandoning the effort to seek and explore, to just kind of have brief little flings of excitement throughout the movie.
Mm.
That, I don't want to say I didn't pay attention to the composition stuff. I definitely did, but I think seeing it however many times I've seen it now, I really just took the characters for granted. I was able to take the characters for granted and just pay attention to the frame. And so, like, for instance, little things like when towards the end, Jean Moreau leaves, the two of them leave Monica Vitti's bedroom. She says, "You two have really worn me out tonight." She's leaning against the wall, and she just kind of flicks the light off with her foot,
Yeah.
and becomes a silhouette. Stuff like that really just stayed with me. When Marcello notices her playing that sort of shuffleboard type of game, and you realize we're watching the real him, uh, but we're seeing a reflection of her.
Reflection. Yeah.
Stuff like that. I mean, I obviously noticed that on the big screen, but not having to pay attention to the narrative or the characters anymore, I just appreciated all the more what he was doing as a painter within the frame. Ironic that I'm saying this having seen it for the first time on a small screen, but that was something that I appreciated even all the more on this viewing.
Would you say that in the theater? Because I mean, I've only seen it on a small screen, but does when you say that, I mean, in general, of course, every movie's different in a cinema as opposed to home. But does the relationship with architecture just pop out much more on us?
Oh
Like those
yeah.
skyscrapers. I mean, I imagine all that must just really stand out.
For sure. I think in general, seeing a movie in a movie theater, it forces you to surrender to the authorial control of the movie. You're
Yeah.
not going anywhere. You're stuck. And if someone, whereas at home, you may check your phone, but if you're in the theater and someone checks their phone and a light pops up, you are pissed because they are ruining what is the necessary experience. So you're obviously just more captivated and have a connection. But specifically with Antonioni in these movies, yeah, when you're seeing, for example, the scenes when Marcello comes home and she's not there, and
Mm.
this with him on the balcony, and the industrial landscape, the high rises and the skyscrapers of Milan, and he's just this one lone man on the balcony. It's something that really struck me watching it that particular moment. And he sees the other guy across the way smoking,
Yeah.
is they are in a major city, world city, among like skyscrapers, and this is like the closest thing they have to a moment of privacy, and yet it's
Right.
outside among the skyscrapers, kind of like a bird perched up on a wire or something. And of course, I think Antonioni's question is, if that's being alone, are you really ever alone? And are you ever able to really deal? Kind of like Marcello's story to the girl later on, much later on at the party, who wants to hear a story. He says, well, there was an intellectual hermit who moved to the big city, became an alcoholic, you know? And I think that's kind of a lot of the themes with Antonioni in a nutshell, regardless of the particular relationship narrative in whatever film we're talking about of his.
Yeah. Well, the relationship with, you know, architecture and atmosphere is of course something that fascinates him, and you see that in this trilogy. You even see that in Red Desert, which was a little later in the 60s. But on the one hand, it makes them feel boxed in, and also everything is changing. This was, I didn't know this just from researching the film. The skyscrapers, that was like brand new in Milan. I mean, they never had that before. It was like in the late 50s that people were they were constructing those skyscrapers. And so on the one hand, they're surrounded by these tall buildings, and that scene you mentioned when he's on the balcony, I even noticed that when he's talking to his neighbor, there's bars up. It's
Yeah.
like everyone's like trapped, and it's very, it's clearly symbolic of how the alienation and even their marriage is deteriorating. So Jeanne Moreau, as she's walking through the city, we see all the old buildings, being torn down, and all these new skyscrapers going up, which very much informs the deteriorating of their marriage. Everything has changed, and why has it changed, and this existential crisis. But then on the other hand, when they go to the party towards the end, everything is through glass. So now, are they necessarily boxed in, because everything is like, the privacy is gone, everyone can see you, but I suppose no one can reach you, because there's a glass there's a glass in the middle of everything. But at the same time, she sees him cheat on her with Monica Vitti, the kiss, because of the glass, so they can see each other, but of course they can't necessarily reach each other. And I really liked how, and people have different interpretations of, the first time he sees Monica Vitti, as you mentioned, through the reflection. Some people, critics have said that, it's like, oh, it's like they're ghosts of themselves. But I saw that very much as he's not going to be able to reach this woman, and he doesn't, obviously, and he can't, and she's not going to be someone to butt into a marriage, as she says. But there's a lot to all of that. I was curious what you feel is this relationship with architecture. Is there a lot more to it than what I'm saying about it, or is there more that you saw in it? I'm curious.
Well, everything you've said about that is so crucial, I think, to understanding Antonioni's point as an Italian filmmaker, because I think this is something that is I don't know about all other countries, but it's very specific to Italy at this time,
Yeah.
as very much opposed to the United States. So I think we spoke before once how in the post neo-realist movement now, you're talking about a transformed Italy, no longer an Italy that's all about their quite physiological suffering of World War II and whatnot. It's a transformed Italy that is growing in leaps and bounds, even economically, more so than any other country in the world other than Japan at the time. And so you're exactly right. You have these brand new skyscrapers that are brand new, something that they've only ever seen in movies themselves. And so the Italian audience, the Italian person, is now venturing inside. Who are we? What is our relationship to what's going on, and to our surroundings? And Antonioni's use of landscape as production design, I think it's kind of like second to none. And so there's a line later on in the movie at the party. One of the guys says, we live in a time that's vile because we're no longer able to decide what's valuable or not. Whereas in the States, I don't think this is a point of self-introspection for anybody. I think in the States, this is an oversimplification, but we always have much more the mentality of being makers of our own destiny. And of course, we're building. Of course, we're making tall buildings. We're expanding. That's why we're here. It is our destiny. It's our destiny. What a totally different psychology than Italy, where they're wondering, what are we doing? and he's at the house, and this is good. But it's amazing, that they're at the house of the industrialist. And you so often, I feel, in a lot of Italian movies kind of this period, you have the artist, the writer, who's wondering, I don't know what to write. He says, I have no more ideas, only memories. And then juxtapose that with the industrialist who says, this is the future I imagined when I was your age. and I went out and built it. And that dichotomy is something that doesn't exist in America. Frankly, we could use a lot more introspection and a lot
Oh
more
God, yeah.
sensibility. Yeah. So that, I think, Antonioni sees that in the architecture, the man on the patio, with the surrounding high rises and whatnot.
Do you think he's sort of commenting like as if to almost to um I don't want to necessarily say pass judgment on that character, but like almost as if to like I was left wondering why is this what you want to imagine? Is these skyscrapers like is that a capitalist criticism or I was because that guy also goes on to talk about how money's everything, and he's talking to Mastroianni. Do you think that's was the function of that character?
I probably I don't want to speak for Antonioni. I'm not like a biographer of hers, but of his. But yeah, I think so. Personally, I think that it's a very valid argument. I'm kind of I consider myself a centrist. Like I see both. I'm an artist, never one that feels that he no longer has ideas.
Right.
I also believe in human progress, that if it's something that benefits our lives, the assembly line allowed us to move. I don't believe in exploiting anybody. So, and that's obviously the other, the pendulum shifts, can shift to that end where, and it's a real issue in America too,
Mm.
the balance of progress. And what is progress? Compared to Italy, and I know my parents and grandparents coming here, um, not knowing that they were not being able to take for granted as a given the fact that you're going to be able to feed everybody every day, and then coming here, as vile as it may, as tacky as it may sound, but to come to a place that has something known as all you can eat, it was just an amazing concept. And so, like, it's great that you can feed everybody, even just if it's TV dinner, if you're coming from a place where half the people are starving, but at the same time we're poisoning ourselves with TV dinner,
Right.
so you have to, we're bringing carcinogens in everywhere, the buildings, the skyscrapers, industry. So you have to find that balance of progress through technology and whatnot, and remaining tethered to the earth. And I think that if you can do that, that's kind of the answer maybe to what movies like this are suggesting as the dilemma.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Well said. And what I, what, I don't know what every critic has said about this film, but just one thing that I feel perhaps is less talked about is just the way in which they are interacting with each other, Jean Moreau and Mastroianni, because to me it wasn't they're actually always nice to each other. Like no matter what, she smiles at him every time he comes into a room, even after cheating on her, which she knows about. She's always it's forced, it's awkward, but they're always polite to each other. And I really liked that the scene and when she gets out of the bathtub and she asks him for a towel, and clearly she's hoping that he's going to be aroused by that. I took it that way, and he doesn't even look at her. And then she's wearing that dress, and she's showing it to him, this new dress, and he's just totally bored of her. Yet he'll go to a hospital at the beginning and start making out with a woman who's clearly mentally ill. Which was, to me, that scene was so shocking, because off the top, you don't know much about them other than that they seem kind, they seem concerned about their friend, they seem warm as they go to console him that he's dying of cancer, and then boom, we see him cheat on his wife immediately, because obviously he's bored at home and he's looking for cheap thrills and escapism and sex and that is fresh and new and exciting. So that really popped out to me. Even that scene later where they go and they're at that nightclub and he's watching that black dancer, and it's very arousing, and he's hardly looking. He looks at that woman the whole time. and his wife is sort of trying, every now and then gives him a bit of a curious look. So I found that really, really fascinating. And as you said, she's searching for answers. She's wandering. She's wondering what went wrong. Whereas I don't know if he necessarily is. I think he's just kind of sleepwalking through everything. I was curious just what you thought of that, the nature of their relationship in general.
Well, yeah, I think the very things that you pointed out about their cordiality to each other, I think it makes it even more heartbreaking
Yeah.
because, obviously, I assume we've all been in love and we've all had first flush, and that is something that definitely can continually renew through a long-term relationship. But in a real long-term relationship like a marriage, there's something much, much deeper there that has no
Mm,
frivolity, that you maybe 10 years in, one can still be madly in love with their wife and still think they're gorgeous and get butterflies from time to time.
yeah.
But and that's lovely, but that's also frivolous. There's something that's an anchor there that's so much deeper than that. And I think this relationship in the movie, I think they have that. I think that they don't, and I think that that's shown through this sort of respect they have for each other in terms of just not being terrible to each other. They
Yeah.
clearly have a decent rapport as people who
Hmm.
respect each other as people, and but we are all kind of going to change. I know people say no one ever changes. I think people do change, even though they may have an anchor that never moves. I think
Right.
people kind of can move around. Um, and I think that dancer actually is quite a metaphor for Jeanne Moreau in that, she has the glass of wine placed on her forehead and she's doing all these contortions
Yeah.
while never spilling the wine. And I think that, life is often like holding a teaspoon of water while you're walking through a beautiful landscape, and the key is to look at everything that there is to see while not dropping any of the water. And
Mm,
that's kind of like a metaphor for life. And I think that's what Jean Moreau's trying to do. She's literally wandering through the city. She's constantly exploring people, and she's trying not to let any of the wine out of the cup while she's doing these contortions, the wine being what she's tethered to as a person and as a wife.
oh,
and
that's
uh,
interesting.
and
Yeah.
the fact that he's willing to look and not take his eyes off of the performance, but he can't look at his wife, who is actually doing the same thing, and she's doing
Yeah.
the same thing not as spectacle but for them. I think that's a lot of the non traditional narrative that Antonioni does purely in cinematic terms.
It's almost, I mean, I know it's an old saying, but it's very much the show don't tell, like on Antonio and his all
Yeah,
show don't
sure,
tell,
sure.
and so one of the critics on the Criterion channel, little these great little featurettes, someone was saying, you could take any image in his film and put it on your wall. I mean, they're so beautifully done. And I know he was a painter, and some people feel that he didn't necessarily set up exactly what he was going to do. It was very organic, um, as the day evolved, I suppose. I mean, I don't really know, and I really wonder how deliberate he was in terms. I mean, I know of course he was. It was very, everything was intentional and deliberate, but whether he actually thought those things through to a T with his cinematography, very much like Hitchcock beforehand, it really makes me wonder. I don't know if you know anything about that by any chance.
I don't, but he obviously had a good eye. I mean, I can't
Certainly.
imagine not being an independent filmmaker. I can't imagine not planning everything to a
Yeah.
T just because you have to make the day. Maybe if you have Mastroianni and Jeanne Moreau and you have enough money to just go with the flow, and obviously in choosing locations and whatnot, like what's there. You know what you can do, and he probably has these values already in mind, and maybe having the freedom to not be locked into a compositional idea till he's there actually
Yeah,
is fuel for him just going with his own flow, like we have to watching just go with his own flow and set it up
exactly.
there. And I'm not even really bothered by the fever rush of having to make the pages. So
Right.
that's very fascinating to learn about that process if we could.
Yeah, no, I'd love to know, but you know, they every shot is just so it just seems, you know, perfect, and you wonder how he discovered um communicating stories this way. I mean, of course, I know a lot of it comes from painting, but you know, for example, just the fact that there are certain times where it's everything is so dark, it almost looks noirish to an extent, and everyone is in black. There are certain times in that party scene, even with Monica Vitti, where everything is very dark, and then it really isn't until that last scene that, you know, because now they're in an open space, of course, very deliberate. There's no more architecture around them. Everything's out in the open, and it's the only time in the film where she really says how she feels, and so does he. But again, it's not a fight, it's very respectful. And you know, she gets more emotional, a little emotional, he gets more vulnerable, so we didn't see that before. But what I love so much about that scene is that she reads this letter that he wrote to her, and he doesn't even recognize that he wrote it. I mean, it's this real deep love that he had for her. And then as he sort of tries to kiss her, and the kid, and you know, they're on the ground kissing, and the camera begins to pull back, and something that a critic had pointed out was, and I had never thought of that, was that his films never actually really end. You know, they sort of are just left open, so you could take whatever you think from that. I mean, are they sort of, is it optimistic in the sense that maybe because they've finally come out in the open with their problems, that maybe they'll be able to fix their problems or work on their problems because of the fact that they're rolling on the ground together? Or is it just because he feels guilty and scared that things are going to change, that he's forcing the intimacy? Because she keeps saying no, no, you know, and she says, you don't love me anymore, and he says, no, I do. So it could be either an end or a renewal. You know, I don't know, what did you take from that ending, or some, or just the film stopping?
Maybe I'm a little more of a romantic in that I would like to think that he he's telling her the truth when he says I still love you. Um, and but love isn't enough, I would say, in that you actually have to work for it. You know,
Of
you have
course, yeah.
enough. You know, you can love someone and hurt that person and then be asked why you did it, and you could be at a loss for words. And so I don't know that she's working for it either. She's definitely more consciously exploring, and she's definitely more in tune to what the tuning that they need in their relationship, and he just kind of doesn't face it. But I think he's telling the truth, and I don't see him as being like forced into intimacy, because I think at that point she is resigned to, I don't want to say not wanting it, because I also kind of believe that she does. I don't believe her when she says I don't love you anymore. Maybe it's because I'm a romantic.
Yeah.
Maybe it's
No,
because I'm
I very
crazy,
much think she does too.
you
I
know.
never felt that she didn't. You know, another kind of indication to that was once at the party when she sees Monica Vitti and him kissing, she then leaves with that guy, you know, this guy. And again, also seen through the glass. That's all it is. He
Oh,
just looks
great.
up at her,
Yeah.
beautifully done. Again, just visually looking through glass. And then they go on this car ride together, no dialogue. You
That
get the
shot in
impression,
the car. That
yeah,
shot in the car,
raining,
man.
it's
Yeah,
great.
beautiful.
You don't know what they're saying, but you get the impression they're connecting, having a good time. And then when it comes to intimacy, a time to kiss, she says, "No, I can't." And I very much took that as she knew she was doing it out of revenge, and that she felt she was, you know, maybe she felt even if she wanted to kiss this man, she was in love, or she felt guilty about it. She wasn't going to stoop to Mastroianni's level, so to speak. So I very much didn't think. I very much felt that she did love him, you know, and I thought that scene really kind of showed that, kind of, you know, really, you know, drove that point home, you know. So I don't know.
I
I don't know how you felt about that.
I well, it obviously it is very, very telling that
Yeah.
she feel that she has free reign, and she says, I can't. I personally think that this is kind of a classic dichotomy between men and women traditionally, in that you know, we are loaded with testosterone, which gives us gumption to go out. And that can be a wonderful thing that builds relationships and society, or it could be something that destroys
Yeah,
relationships and
absolutely.
society. And so much of it, I think, as men, is because this is a natural biological issue that is just as natural and legitimate as menstruation. But we have to find a way to channel this energy into something that is positive and constructive. And obviously he can't. He's, for God's sakes, now he didn't instigate the thing with the mentally ill woman in the hospital, okay, but he was like, yeah.
He went for
You
it.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I like how right after that, I took that as guilt. Like he just tells her what happened. And then he's
yeah,
like, you know, it was all her. I didn't do anything. And I'm like,
right.
yeah, but still
So he
you
gave
went
his
for it.
so I think her in the movie is, it's so much of a more typical, maybe estrogen gift, to be introspective and be more, you're caring about people, not, and their relationship to you and your effect on them, not going out and achieving something. And obviously both of those things put together can really be wonderful. So I just think that at that end, I think she's resigned to the reality that he's no longer invested. And I think that's what when she says, I don't love you anymore, I think really what she's saying is, I know this isn't going to work anymore.
The way
And
it
I
is.
think
Yeah.
he's reminded of that need to be more in tune with your effects on people, let alone the person you love and made a commitment to in front of your community and your God and the law, and someone who wrote that letter. And how do you lose yourself so far from where you were? How do you lose
Yes.
yourself to the point where you don't even recognize your own words and your own thoughts that were so
Yeah.
profound? And I
Yeah.
think as
That,
a lot of men, we have to be more tethered to the earth. And maybe that's it, they're rolling around on the ground. I think that's both of them just jumping back in it. And I know I actually, it made me a little uncomfortable the first time I saw it, because she's saying no, and you really, again,
yeah.
you know what ends up happening. Um,
Right.
but I think it's him as a man being put more in touch with the ground of his feelings for her. She's doing that to him, and then him as a man, as we tend to do, to jump in it. And I think the
Right.
pan away is, there's no more to explore.
Yeah,
People,
that's it.
they are
Yeah.
going to either survive or not,
Yeah.
and that's the conundrum we're all in.
Yeah, exactly. And it's up to you to interpret what, you know, what you feel about it. What's so interesting about Antonioni's films, and this one definitely is certainly, he's very intellectual in a lot of ways. You know, his films are full of metaphors. They're things that intellectuals and scholars love to talk about, but at the same time, they're very psychological. They have a and he doesn't just feed you answers. This is why this is happening. This is why that is happening. You see, people can take all kinds of different feelings and interpretations about what's happening between those two people at the end. Or, you know, some people could just think that Mastroianni's character is a pure scumbag. You know, I don't think he is, right? I mean, he certainly has
Yeah.
he certainly has his share of flaws. Um, but his films sort of work on both of those levels. I find. I don't know how you do. Do you find him to be more of an intellectual filmmaker, or is he kind of or is he sort of a middle ground between, you know, someone who really explores relationships but yet is very intellectual at the same time?
I think that's a characteristic of the handful or so of auteur directors at that time, like Bergman, for instance, um, or even like Visconti. I think that the European, what's considered the European sophisticated art film of that time is so different than the American notion of cinema, where you have a physical obstacle every so often that has to be overcome, and in that
Yeah.
doing, that speaks of character. Whereas in these movies, and not just Antonioni, but the others I mentioned as well, they are literally speaking, posing questions that speak to character.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that itself could be, you could trademark that slogan, the intellectual cinema. That could be a genre in itself.
Yeah.
I personally, I loved, like, when I was a young person, first being exposed to these movies, Godard too, early Godard too. Just hearing in a movie people asking the questions that I was asking myself, and that it's not just uh, an action set piece that is supposed to inform you of character. It really, really spoke to me as someone who would aspire to be a poet and an artist. As a filmmaker now, with many more years under my belt, I think that it would be wonderful to have a marriage between the two, where you have actual characterization based on what people are doing internally and through relationships, somehow combined with a movement of cinema. And movement doesn't have to be a chase, although it can. It could also mean an amazing pan,
Yeah.
or an amazing zoom, or just blocking within a scene. So I think all those elements of cinema is something that none of us should overlook. And I think, like his contemporaries, Antonioni really leaned in to the asking of questions,
Yes.
literally the asking of questions.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree. I was reading that Mastroianni and Moreau were disappointed with the film, and I think it was because of how low key and neutral they were. And as an actor myself, I can see why a performer would feel that way, because we're drawn to being emotional and diverse on screen, and explosive, and here everything is so subdued, which I think is a real challenge, actually. So I'm only speculating that perhaps that's why they didn't care for the film.
Kind of like Wong Kar-wai's movies, where he actually doesn't really prepare, I think, before coming. I think he doesn't even have a screenplay before production, and they kind of work it. And it's the same sort of thing, where it's this sensuality of the frame itself. And for sure, if you're an actor, you could get a non-actor to not have a pulse, and to hit his mark. um, but a lot of times, I think as an actor, if the question is as an actor, you're right, we want to get into the sandbox. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean you have to chew the scenery, but acting is behavior from
Yes.
moment to moment. And if you're not if behavior isn't what anyone's after, you could get anyone. But the challenge, I would say, then, is uh to internalize whatever you've prepared for that moment and are experiencing live in that moment through other means. Like, if it's in your soul, it's going to come out. I think the best audition process I ever experienced as an actor was years ago. After the first audition, they wanted me to come in and do whatever I prepared. The second audition, they had me with the person that they had already cast as the lead opposite, and they gave us the situation and the script, and we were prepared. But when we showed up, they said no talking. And they wanted to see behavior, and they wanted to see meaning, because acting is not talking, acting is behavior, and they
Right.
wanted to see our relationship and chemistry. So how do you challenge everything that's going through you, you know in the other instruments besides the voice? So I would say that would be the challenge for an actor, maybe in an Antonioni movie.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is has its share of challenges, because when as someone who teaches acting, as soon as those cameras start rolling or you get up on the stage, the instinct is to perform, to
Yeah.
show. So how do you get rid of that feeling of showing? How do you just be? How do you trust that you're enough? And by doing, not that I'm saying everybody has to always do so little, but obviously in an Antonioni film, it requires that coldness. And I'm very drawn to that now than I was perhaps 10 years ago. And Fassbinder's, the German filmmaker, his films are like that too. Not always, but he has similar behavior because the coldness is speaks so much about the people as this one does. So I find that really fascinating. Coldness is not always the easiest thing to play, and I thought they did it really well. So it's I don't know how if their opinions about the film evolved over time, but I just read apparently they weren't too happy about it. So
I
it
think
is
a
what
lot,
it is.
when you're a director that's kind of outside the box, I think you hear actors say the same thing all the time who work with Terrence Malick. And I don't know if they say that about every film, but his process is just so different,
Yeah,
and I don't even know that he has something that really could be called a writer. He clearly writes it all in on the spot and then in editing. It depends, that could be an amazing process. I think Ben Affleck for To the Wanderer was talking about, he says, I just never experienced any process like that before. I'm in a
right.
scene and then he's moving from a tree up to us and we don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
But then Christopher Plummer couldn't stand the
I
process.
heard him say that in an interview. He wrote him later to tell him that. He's like, get a
Yeah.
writer.
And obviously as an actor, you never know for sure until you're watching what they did with it.
Of course. Of
So who
course.
knows? They could have had it, because it's such a journey. Any actor's performance is a journey. When you're on a movie set every day, you're a family for that month or whatever, and you're invested and you have so much preparation. And as opposed to stage, it's a mosaic, and you're like, where are we today? Okay, I'm going to grab that tile, and this is, as the actor, what I'm doing from setup to setup. So they totally could have been invested in something that they had a vision of in their mind, and then they see it,
Yeah.
and just disappointment
Yeah.
for it not being what you thought could have really been kind of heavy, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. It could be. It could be. But I love it. I think it's a
Fantastic.
wonderful film. Yeah, I think it's a really, really great film. Can you talk about what you're working on now?
Yeah, we are in pre-production for our feature narrative that we're shooting in August, Children of God. Have to get married first, but so that does take a little center stage. But we were totally ready to go last year. The good thing about that, even though we were postponed for COVID, because of COVID, as heartbreaking as that was, the good thing is that we've been ready for about a year, and all we have to do now is do it. So after, hopefully, universe willing, we settle that, we'll be shooting.
Great. That's great to hear. And where's the best place for people to follow you on social media and keep, keep up with news about the film?
Well, we are Zio Chicho Cinema. That's ZIOCICCIO Cinema. And on Instagram or YouTube would be the best places to see all of our stuff.
Perfect. Great. Well, I'll leave the link in links for people to follow Joe in the description box below. And I'm really glad that we did another Italian review today, another classic. So thanks so much, Joe, for coming on. Please come again. Let's do it again sometime soon.
Will do. Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching and or listening. If you are currently listening to this, my YouTube channel, on the audio version of the podcast, and you've run out of episodes to listen to, head over to the YouTube channel where every single episode that I have ever recorded can be found, youtube.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. I also want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link, patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. Patreon is bonus content that I create month in and month out, which is exclusive content. And it is based on polls that I put out at the beginning of every single month, which you as a member will very much have access to vote on, which will make you part of the decision making as to what I do on Patreon month in and month out. So if you're interested in becoming a member and you like my work, head over to the link for full details. You can also leave a donation to my podcast at Ko-fi.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. I will leave the link in the description box below. And lastly, if you are here for the first time on my YouTube channel, or if you haven't already done so, please consider subscribing to my channel by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. You will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left in just a second. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes or when I go live. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.